Welcome back to 2K Away. Well, welcome back. I am Paige. This is my sister Peyton.
Hi.
We used to be 2,000 miles away from each other. We are together now, but we're keeping 2K away. So, this is my week, me, Paige. Last week we talked about...
Mitchell Sims and Ruby Paget.
Yeah.
Which was a wild one.
Crazy frickin' case. Unreal. Yeah. But, so this week, I'm going back to my unsolved roots.
And I am very upset that you did this one because I had it on my list.
But you didn't tell me you had it on your list. In my defense,
I was going to surprise you.
Well, surprise. It's mine.
Fine.
So, but this one, we are talking about the Cleveland torso murders, or the other name that this person is known by is the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, is what he's known by. But, I mean, they never caught him, so.
Yeah, well, he's most well known as the Cleveland torso murderer.
Right. And as a whole, the victims are known as the Cleveland torso murders. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of how this is known. So, we are going back to the Great Depression era in Cleveland, Ohio, in case you are wondering where Cleveland was.
Also, when I first actually looked into this, I wasn't expecting it to be this old.
Yeah.
For some reason, I don't know why, I thought it was in the 50s or 60s, maybe because a bunch of horrific shit happens in the 60s and 70s.
No kidding.
Maybe that's what I was thinking. But yeah, when I first heard about this, I was like, really? It's that old? And it's gnarly.
Literally smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression.
It's crazy.
So, first off, the Great Depression lasted, and of course I had to look this up, from 1929 to around 1939. And like I said, this is right in the middle of that. To be exact, between 1934 and 1938. So, the Depression hit Cleveland really hard, as it did most big cities. Mm-hmm. But there were a ton of people who lost everything when it hit, and they ended up just on the streets because they had nowhere else to turn.
Right.
So to deal with this, people made their own little shanty towns, is what they called them. They were filled with transients, homeless, and people who just needed a place to get back on their feet, really.
Right.
So these places around Cleveland, they kind of had their own bars, brothels, clubs, their own little... It was their own little community.
Their own little city within a city.
Yeah, pretty much. So the shantytown that this circles around was called Kingsbury Run. So that's why he is the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run.
Okay.
So, getting right into it. Victim number 1. On September 5th, 1934, and this was before 8 a.m., a man was walking along Lake Erie looking for driftwood, and he found something that was definitely not driftwood. So this turns out it was the lower half of a woman's torso with just her thighs attached. So her legs were amputated at the knees. Her skin was a rough, leathery red from what they suspect was some kind of chemical that the killer put on the skin. They ended up finding a few of her other body parts, but her head was never recovered. This woman was thought to be in her 30s, and she was never identified, but from here on out, she was kind of referred to as the Lady of the Lake. People actually kind of think of her as victim 0 because she wasn't originally thought to be part of the Cleveland torso murders originally.
Really?
No, yeah. So people nowadays basically have gone back and said, we think that she was victim 0. She was the first.
Okay.
I'm referring to her as victim number 1, though, because that's what you should refer to her as. So, victim number 2. On September 23rd, 1935, this is terrible, 2 boys were playing catch near the bottom of Jackass Hill near the lake. I don't know why this is called Jackass Hill, but it's fun.
I hope there's like a donkey farm near.
I can't confirm or deny that, so...
I hope that's a thing. And if not, it should be.
Okay. So when the ball went further than what they wanted, they found the next two victims. These poor boys.
Oh, the next two victims?
Two victims, yes.
Oh, poor
together.
children.
Oh, and this is not how you want to discover anybody. So this...
Well, you don't really want to discover this at all when you're a child.
No, but...
I love how I specify when you're a child.
Right.
Okay.
So, this area was definitely a place where the killer had to have carried the bodies there, because this was not a place where you could just back a car up to and dump it out of a trunk or anything like that. So definitely not equipped for that.
No.
So the first victim he was fully naked with only socks on, and he was decapitated and fully castrated. So the body was completely clean and drained of blood. No blood on the scene whatsoever. They found ligature marks on both of his wrists, and they ended up deciding that the cause of death was decapitation.
Okay.
So
he was fully intact other than his head and his penis?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So they determined that he had been dead for just a few days. They were able to actually figure out his identification, though, because they took fingerprints, and this was 28-year-old Edward Andrassy. He was a hospital orderly who had, honestly, a decent arrest record, which is how they were able to identify him with his fingerprints. So, the cops definitely knew this guy. They questioned his family. They didn't really get, a whole lot.
Yeah.
But they knew that he had frequented the Kingsbury Run area and the nightlife surrounding it. Yeah. So it was also rumored that Andrassy possibly was homosexual, but it was just a rumor.
Okay.
So the police actually hadn't linked these bodies, like I said, to the lady in the lake yet. So they were trying to figure out why these two men were killed. So going back to the rumor, if he was actually gay, was there some kind of sexual motive in killing him? Was it some kind of homophobic killing? They didn't know.
Wait, have you described the other one yet?
Nope.
Oh, that was all. Okay.
That was all just Andrassy, the first one of the victims.
Okay.
So the other body there, he was about 30 feet from Andrassy. This body was found similarly to Andrassy's body in that he was fully nude, decapitated, and castrated.
Oh.
Yeah.
Was it kind of the same kind of assumptions with Andrassy, where it's like, or wait, was this man identified?
No. He ended up not being identified. They did find both men's heads, but they couldn't identify the second man. They think that he was in his 40s, and he had actually been dead for a few weeks. So he was killed before Andrassy was killed. So they weren't actually killed together. So they truly don't know what the motive was for these two men.
Oh, do you think it was like, maybe like one was killed and dumped first, or one was killed, kept, and then dumped
when the other one was dumped? Don't know.
Ugh.
All great questions. No answers I have. But the weird thing about the second man, the John Doe, his body actually had the same kind of chemical burn like the lady in the lake. It was kind of red and leathery and tough, just like Lady in the Lake. But they haven't tied the two crime scenes together yet.
Yeah.
Right. So, next one, January 26th, 1936. So, from the Lady in the Lake in 1934, it was a full year later that they found the two men's bodies, which that was the main reason that they didn't connect
tie them together. Okay. Well,
right.
I guess that makes sense.
Right. So This was, let's see, so they found the 2 men September of 1935, so now we're fast forwarding to January 26th of 1936.
Question.
Now we're gonna go like quickly with these.
Question.
What?
Where did they find the 2 men's heads? Was it like in the same
area?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is when is the next one? Because that's what I was on.
January 26th of 1936. So 4 months later.
Okay.
Yeah. Had to do some quick math there. I'm like,
sorry,
wait a second.
I was burping as you were doing that, so I was trying not to like do it into the mic. Okay, go ahead.
So nasty.
I know.
So, yes. So 4 months later, January 26th, the 4th victim was found. Mm-hmm. It was, of course, January in Ohio. So it was very snowy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those winters in Ohio were real harsh, especially at this point in time.
Right.
So alongside the Hart Manufacturing Building, I think it's some kind of...
Makes hearts?
Yes, they make hearts for people.
I was going to say for scarecrows.
Oh, 2 very different things. No, I think this was some kind of, I said manufacturing building. Of course it was.
Thanks. I know exactly what that is now.
You know, where they manufacture things. Factory. Fuck. That was hard for me.
Manufacturing factory.
Yeah, some kind of factory of something. I don't know what they did.
Okay.
Anyway.
I was going to be like, thanks. That told me a lot more than...
Alongside this building,
Okay.
2 half-bushel baskets were found together with the body parts of a woman that was wrapped in newspapers. So what was in the baskets was a half of a woman's torso, 2 thighs, 1 arm, and a hand. So very not complete. And naturally decapitated. So after the snow melted 2 weeks later, they found the rest of her body in a vacant lot on Orange Avenue nearby. So they found the entirety of her. Mm-hmm. Her cause of death was deemed to be decapitation as well, but they think that the killer waited until rigor mortis had set in before dissecting the rest of her body. I'm not sure how they figured that out.
Well, then why would you do
That's
that?
what I found. So it had to have been harder to do, because while breaking rigor can be done, obviously, it's definitely harder to do than just cutting them up fresh.
Oh.
I know, I hated myself for saying it, but that's, I don't know why. Yes. And I don't know how they figured that. But again, that's just what I found.
Especially in, like, the 1930s.
Right? So they were able to use her fingerprints to identify her as well. So her name was, I almost said Frances. Florence Palillo was her name. Florence had, honestly, she had just fallen on hard times, just like everybody else. She had been married and divorced twice. She was an alcoholic. And she had some run-ins with the law as well, and had convictions in soliciting and dealing in liquor and drugs. So Florence knew how to have a good time, apparently. So she frequented Kingsbury Run as well. Mm-hmm. So they have a little bit of connection there, but they still haven't connected anything together yet.
Yeah.
At this point. So they just...
So no big deal. We just found 4 different...
Right.
Do I want to say disarticulated people? But not whole people.
Cut up bodies.
Yeah.
You know? So that's what I'm saying. That's what I said next here. It says they just found victim number 4 and they still hadn't linked together at this point that they were all connected yet. They were spread out enough-ish to where it hadn't even occurred to them that it may be one person doing this. So.
Okay.
June 5th. So this is 5 months later. 1936. 2 boys decided to skip school to go fishing. I mean, come on.
That's really wholesome.
I'm telling you. When they get...
I bet they never skipped school again.
I thought the same thing. Poor things. So, when they got close to the East 55th Street Bridge, I almost said 56th for some reason, they found a pair of pants all bundled up. And they decided to poke at the bundle with their fishing poles their cane fishing poles like they had back then.
Oh.
Because boys, let's poke at the thing with a stick.
Right. I had a cane fishing pole.
I know. When they did, though, a head rolled out of the
Oh,
bundle.
no. Oh, no.
Like, how horrifying would that be?
Oh, no.
I don't mean to laugh, but
no,
Jesus.
Like, oh, my God. Oh, poor kids. Oh. Like I said, I bet they never skipped school again.
Nope. I mean, I don't have that as a fact, but I bet they didn't.
Yeah.
So the next day, the rest of the body, which was fully intact, was no other bodies were castrated like the first two men.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, the body was fully intact, and it was found a few hundred yards away near the Nickel Plate Railroad Police Building. So a little bit ballsy there.
Mm-hmm.
This body was cleaned and drained of blood, just like the others, and the cause of death was decapitation. Up to this point, since there was a lack of blood at all the scenes, the police think that these were just the dumping sites, and all of these people were killed elsewhere. Because, I mean,
I think
again,
it's obvious.
there's no blood anywhere on scene, so.
I'm sorry, you're at body number 5 now, and you're just now coming to this conclusion?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
are they connecting them at least?
No, not yet.
What?
So they determined that this was a male in his 20s. The great thing about this body, though, was that he had 6 tattoos.
And they called him the tattooed man.
They called him the tattooed man because, since you're getting ahead of me, he was never identified. But I wasn't going to get to that yet.
Sorry.
Because the police thought this was great because someone had to know who this man was because he had very specific tattoos. Because I even think that one of his tattoos there was a name.
Yeah.
In one of his tattoos.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, only specific types of people had tattoos. Mm-hmm. So they thought they were definitely going to get an identity on him. They didn't come up with anything on his fingerprints, so they did something that actually reminded me a little bit of the Paris morgue. But I saw 2 different things on this, though. The first thing that I found said that they put his head on display in the morgue with descriptions of his tattoos and let anyone on the street come in to see if they could identify him. The other thing that I saw was that I think maybe more of what they did, they ended up making a death mask of his face.
I think that's what it was. I don't think they actually displayed his actual head.
And I say this because they made a death mask of his face, and they put it along with the description of his tattoos, again, on display at the Great Lakes Exposition of 1936 to see if anybody could identify him. Either way, thousands of people ended up coming to take a look at the guy, but nobody identified him.
I was gonna say, now I was getting ready to be like, oh yeah, well then if that's the case, I definitely don't think they put his head on display. But then I'm like, there's weirder shit on display.
Stranger things have happened.
I don't know why I would think that.
I'm telling you, but I think that it was the death mask that they did. I mean, the newspapers even printed a picture, like a diagram of his body with the placements of where the tattoos were and descriptions of them to see if they could identify him. But
and still nothing.
He was always just referred to as a tattooed man because he was never identified. And his death mask is now on display at the Cleveland Police Museum.
Ooh.
A few of the other victims' death masks are on display there as well. They've got a whole thing there. I'd kind of like to go.
So, trip to Cleveland.
I got a lot of... It's not that far.
Yeah.
According to Midwesterners, oh, it's only 8 hours. It's fine. We can make that.
It's no big deal.
We'll just drive there tomorrow. It's fine.
If it's under 20 hours, it's not a problem.
Exactly. Because when we went to Florida, I'm like, it's only 14 hours. We can drive that. We'll just drive that in a day. It's fine.
Oh, yeah.
So I actually got quite a bit of my information from the Cleveland Police Museum's website. So go check it out. So next, July 22nd, 1936. So this is just a month later, just over a month later.
Mm-hmm.
A teenage girl was walking in the woods near Clinton Road on Cleveland's west side. She discovered the decapitated body of a man in his 40s. His head and clothes were found nearby. Now, this one was different because there was a ton of blood on the scene. So the officers decided that this was where he was killed. And obviously, and obviously the killer didn't get a chance, either didn't get a chance or didn't care to move this person.
Yeah.
But they found out that this guy had been dead for about 2 months. So clearly the killer had time to move the body, but just didn't, and only decapitated him. That was his cause of death. This man was never identified either. So at this point, they're thinking, well, I think maybe later people or later on they decided that maybe this was the point where the killer was kind of losing control, maybe. That this might have been just like a random attack. Don't know.
Because that's kind of what I was thinking, is that if he's possibly like just picking people off the street, maybe this one went a little awry,
right? That
he was not prepared for.
It was a random killing, and he lost control,
and then he's like
brutally beat the dude, decapitated him, and then just left him. Don't know. So a few months later, September 10th of 1936, a vagrant tripped over the upper half of a decapitated man's torso near the train tracks in Kingsbury Run. They ended up finding the lower half of his torso and parts of his legs in a nasty sewage-type pond thing nearby. Yeah, they had a diver go in, and they recovered the lower half of his torso and parts of his legs in that nasty parts of his legs. Yeah, okay. not all of his legs. They never found the man's head, but they did conclude his cause of death was decapitation.
Okay.
Yeah, they think he was in his late 20s, and he was never identified. So they are finally now starting to think that all of these killings are connected at this point.
That was going to be my next question.
And they think that the killer may have some kind of knowledge of anatomy. The dissection of all the bodies were too well done, and without hesitation, it seemed, for just like a regular dude to be doing this.
Yeah.
So on September 15th, this was 5 days after the dude tripped over the upper half of the decapitated man's torso. A shit ton of investigators and scientists gathered to talk about the killer and figure out where to go from here. They wanted to talk about who it could possibly be, what type of person it was, basically create a profile almost.
What kind of scientists?
Just said scientist. Don't know.
Oh, okay.
Don't know.
I was going to say, never mind. It's dumb. I was going to be like, are you going to bring like a bunch of like geologists? And,
maybe.
What kind of scientists? Because it does matter.
Said scientists.
Okay.
So the press was even invited to this.
Of course.
I don't know how well. I don't know that I would have invited them. But
you shouldn't have.
Either way, what they concluded was the killer had to be local. Some of the areas that the bodies were found in.
I could have told you that.
Well, that was the first thing they concluded, because some of the bodies that some of the areas that the bodies were found in were too secluded, I guess, for anybody that's not from around there to figure out. Anyway.
You're telling me stuff that I think I already know.
They also thought that the killer had to be strong, because they think that they might have carried their victims to all of these sites. And if it's just one dude doing it, you're carrying an entire body of somebody, they think he's got to be strong. The strong man did it. They also thought that the killer had to have some kind of medical knowledge or know their way around a knife. Mm-hmm. The way the bodies were dissected was very telling of this, because a lot of the limbs were cut off at the joint where it would have been easier to amputate. Yeah. Not just sawed right through like the middle of your shin.
Yeah, like wasn't it like actually like pretty like precise cuts as well?
Yeah.
Like it was done rather cleanly.
Yeah. So because of this, they thought that the killer could either be a butcher, a hunter, or a doctor, possibly.
Yeah.
So those were the three big things that they were thinking. So at this point, they had to pick the lead investigators. The person that they picked to be the full lead to lead the investigation, he had actually already been working on a few of these cases. His name was Peter Murillo. He was actually a Ukrainian immigrant. He came to the U.S. as a teenager, and he was an excellent police officer and investigator because he could really get to the bottom of things, and it helped that he knew quite a few different languages. Oh. And this was the case that haunted him for the rest of his life. Even after he retired, he still tried to figure out,
I'm sure,
who this was. The other person that the mayor personally chose to help lead the investigation was none other than Elliot Ness, who was, I knew you would do that, who was at the time the safety director of Cleveland. So basically he had authority over the police and the fire department. For anyone who doesn't know, and Peyton, who needs reminded apparently, Elliot Ness, along with his team of law enforcement agents who were called the Untouchables, was the one who finally took down the famous crime boss, Al Capone.
That's right. Okay.
Back in 1931.
I drew such a blank. I'm so sorry.
No, I told you. I was going to be pissed if you did the same thing as the Icebox murders, and you did.
Sorry.
What
really pisses me off, I was literally just at the Mob Museum, like, in March.
Yeah.
And I, like, took a million pictures and read a million things, so that really pisses me. I'm so sorry.
That pisses me off,
I am ashamed.
I wanted a better reaction than that. Than the blank deer in a headlight stare.
Sorry.
Like a gasp or something would have been nice.
Okay. Well, next time I'll give you the blank stare and I'll gasp. So I'll be like... I won't give you any eyebrows, but I'll give you a gasp.
There was something else that he did. It was another big thing. I think it was some kind of murder. But he got a ton of praise for as well. This was after Capone.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what it was. That case had a ton of evidence and a for sure person of interest as well. Basically, he just had to figure out how to get him. Yeah. So it's kind of like Al Capone. Everybody knew he was this giant crime boss. The person, but everybody knows what he's doing.
Yeah, but what are we going to get him on?
How can we get him? That's how he was able to do that.
Meanwhile, Elliot's like, taxes.
Right. Oh. So the difference with this case, though, they had literally nothing to go on, and he had to start from scratch. So, but again, the mayor asked for him personally. He's like, you will be the one. You're the big guy. You can get this done. Not so much. So Ness treated this like he did with Capone's case, in that he got a small group of people that he could trust implicitly, got them together, and he did his own investigation and didn't really give Murillo much of what he found. He pretty much kept everything close to the chest and didn't share anything. Murillo, on the other hand, not a good partner. No. Murillo interviewed over 1,500 people for this case. For all of this.
Wow.
So he was doing it, man. But
at the same time, is that actually a lot at the time? Because it's like, well, if you're in Cleveland, it's a big area, and
yeah, but I mean, himself though, yeah, doing over 1,500 interviews.
Oh, so it wasn't like him and like a small team; it was just him.
There was another guy that was involved as well. That was kind of his second, and I guess they did a lot of the stuff together. But I mean, for the most part, he was the one rounding these people up and interviewing people.
Okay, I take back what I just said.
So, February 23rd, 1937. So this is now a few months after the last body was found and after they started the investigation of, it's a serial killer. Mm-hmm. The upper half of a woman's torso in her mid-20s washed up on the shore east of Broughtonall of Lake Erie. Her lower half washed up 3 months later in the place that the lady in the lake was found. Probably just a coincidence. It just kind of weird.
Is it a coincidence?
Well, they said it was washed up, like basically she was thrown in the lake and then just happened to wash up in that area.
Okay.
Not like she was placed.
Okay.
Either way, her head was never recovered. They determined, though, that she was decapitated after she was already dead, so they didn't actually have a cause of death. And she was never identified, so didn't have much on this woman. So that was victim number 8. Number 9, June 5th. 4 months later, 1937, a burlap sack was found with bones in it under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. The skull was not in the bag, and that was pretty much what it is. It was just bones. The only thing that was missing from this skeleton was a rib. Don't know if it was just because maybe it got it taken. They failed to put...
Who knows?
They determined that this was a female in her 40s, and she had been dead for up to a year. They were able to get a possible identification from dental work. So it's not actually like 100%, but possibly it's Rose Wallace, who ended up being the only black victim.
Yes. You said some of her skull was in the bag?
No, her skull was not in the bag at all. Just the rest of her bones were.
How the hell were they how'd they identify her with dental records without a skull?
Her skull was there next to the bag.
You just said it wasn't there.
It wasn't in the bag. It was next to the bag.
Okay. I'm pretty sure you didn't tell me that.
I'm pretty sure I did tell you that.
Whatever.
You'll see when you edit.
I'll see.
You'll see.
That you said there wasn't a skull in the bag. It was just a bag of bones.
Right, because the skull was next to the bag. Whatever. So, Rose Wallace, it's kind of back and forth whether they are 100% sticking with that was an unidentified person or not.
Yeah.
So.
Or if it was Rose Wallace.
Correct. So, a month later, July 6th, 1937, part of the headless body, mostly the trunk of the person, of a man in his late 30s was discovered and pulled out of the Cuyahoga River. His heart and all of his organs were missing, as if he had been gutted and the heart specifically taken out. So it didn't look like fish had attacked the body.
Yeah, like it was very clear.
Right. It was...
that it had been removed.
Removed, yes. Within the next few days, they found the rest of his body, but his head was never recovered, and he was never identified. Mm-hmm. So at this point, Murillo thought that the killer was actually using the railway to get around. So it passed through Kingsbury Run, and a lot of people throughout the quote-unquote hobo population used the railway and would sleep in the cars to keep warm from the brutal Ohio winters. He thought this would be an easy way to pick up transients from there, since that's what seemed to be the overall victim profile.
Yeah.
He would even, this is hilarious, he would go undercover in the area and try to dress like them to see if he could get any information out of them at all.
Which investigator is this again?
This is Murillo.
Okay.
And there's a picture. I'll definitely post it.
Oh, no.
Yes. And one of the things that I watched, the dude was like, it looks like he got like the old stereotypical hobo with the stick with the bag, the handkerchief tied around.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He
like,
looks
what
pretty
would
cute,
probably,
actually.
Okay, like what would clearly be seen as a...
Oh, yeah.
Yikes.
Yes.
Why am I imagining
hilarious.
something like something that would be like truly offensive?
Yeah, I don't know if this is truly how people dressed in that community, but he thought so, and it's what he did. It's really funny.
Oh.
And all the while, Ness was still doing his own thing. So, April of 1938, we are back, and we are now, like 9 months later.
I find it weird and just unsettling is the word I'm looking for. I don't know. That they're basically two investigators doing two separate investigations.
Yeah.
That's weird to me. And I don't think that's good, and that probably contributed to this not being solved.
Maybe.
In my opinion. Well, I guess we'll see at the end.
Because the thing is, they fully disagreed on what they thought.
Right?
So, in April of 1938, the lower half of a leg was found in the banks of the Cuyahoga River. A month later, 2 burlap sacks with both parts of a woman's torso and most of both of the legs were found. So not even like all of her legs were found. Nothing else was recovered from this woman. That's all they ever found of her.
And this is body number
11.
Okay.
So this was the first time that drugs were found in a victim's system. I never found what drugs? Just drugs in general.
Okay.
Now, a new question arose at this point in time. Were these drugs taken recreationally? Or was the victim drugged by the killer as a means to subdue them to keep them still as they decapitated them or dissected them?
Yeah.
She was never identified.
Because then that brings a whole other theory.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would make sense with the victim profile, basically. Vagrants and...
Well, and especially if some of them, like, the cause of death was decapitation.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to not that I know from experience, but I'm sure it's a lot easier to decapitate someone while they're still alive if they're not moving and flailing about.
Right.
Because if they weren't drugged, then they would probably be fighting for their lives.
Right. So, because of the victim pool, they weren't sure if this was a recreation thing or if the killer was the one that did this.
It would have been nice to know what the drug was.
I know.
Yeah.
So, August 16th, this was 4-ish months later, 2 victims were found in a dump site on East 9th and Lakeside, which was in clear view of Elliot Ness's office window. So, so this is the 12th and 13th victim. So, the last 2, essentially. So, the first one was a woman. Her torso was wrapped in a man's blue blazer and then wrapped again in an old quilt. So, her legs and her arms, they were found in, like, makeshift boxes. And the body parts were wrapped in brown butcher paper and held together with rubber bands. So, in these boxes.
So does that mean that are they pointing it more towards a butcher now?
I mean,
if she's found in butcher paper?
It would fit.
Yeah, because I mean, who else would have access to that?
Yeah, but they think she may have been refrigerated before she was dumped. Maybe, possibly. Not sure, but she was never identified. And then the other victim that was found there was a man who had only been decapitated, so the rest of his body was intact.
Oh, okay.
His head was found in a can nearby. And
like a Folgers
that's what I'm picturing.
Can?
That's the words that were used. So.
Okay.
He was never identified either, and these were the last confirmed victims of this killer.
Okay.
So in total, there were 13 people, though some still think that the lady in the lake was not one of the victims at all. So anywhere 12 to 13 victims. 6 of them were women, 7 were men, and only 3 were positively identified. And of course, none were fully intact when they were found. Every single one of them was decapitated, and then it varied whether depending on, I don't know what it depended on, but some were cut up, basically. There was no true pattern other than the decapitation, and race and gender obviously didn't matter.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, too, other than decapitation, like I said, that was the only pattern, and 2 of the bodies were found with chemical burns on them.
Yeah,
so,
and especially the way they were disposed of, too.
Yeah. It was all crazy different, really.
Yeah.
So, while Murillo never had a real suspect, Ness thought that he found his guy.
Okay.
So, backtracking a bit, before the last few bodies were found, Ness got a lead and he kept this guy under surveillance for a while. This man was Francis Edward Sweeney, doctor, drunk, and paranoid schizophrenic. Sweeney was born...
Oh.
a really great combination.
Okay.
Sweeney was born in 1894, and he was a qualified doctor by the time he was 26 or 27.
No.
Yeah.
No.
But he was. Apparently, he honestly was really smart. Apparently. Either way, by 26 or 27, he was a full-fledged doctor. Maybe it was different by then. You don't know. He got married.
Right, I don't.
And he had 2 kids, but his wife ended up divorcing him in 1934 because he was violent towards her. So already a really great guy.
Yeah.
He would be gone for long periods of time and would even neglect his clinic that he worked at. So once Ness decided that he for sure had their guy, he had his trusted team round him up and take him to a hotel. Not to a police station or to his office, to a hotel.
That's weird.
This is why. He didn't take him in for questioning because he knew he didn't have anything solid on him at the time. There was no evidence.
Yeah.
Other than the bodies, and there wasn't evidence on the bodies that they could get. So literally nothing to link him other than basically he was sure that this was the guy. To add to it, one of Sweeney's cousins was a congressman at the time, so he knew he could not fuck up with this guy and take him in without any evidence. So he had his guys guard the hotel room around the clock and kept this close to the chest so nobody would know who he had or what he was doing. He kept him there for over a week. It's crazy. The first few days that he had him there, he was literally just drying him out because he was drunk, so he was drunk all the time. So this was just a drying out period.
Oh my God.
Once he was fully sober, the questioning started. They even did a couple polygraphs on him that supposedly he failed. This is all very unofficial.
At a hotel?
At a hotel. Ness realized that he wasn't actually going to get anywhere with this guy. He was never actually confessing or anything like that. He did, he supposedly failed those polygraph tests, but still.
Had he been read Miranda rights?
No.
Oh my God.
Well, at this point in time,
What
Miranda
the
rights weren't a
fuck?
thing, I don't think.
I'll have to look that up.
I don't think they were.
I don't think
Either
they were
way.
either.
Either way, he wasn't read any rights. He was just gathered up and taken to a hotel and dried out and questioned.
Okay, you know, it was a different time, I guess.
It was a different time. Yep.
Okay.
So he let Sweeney go after after like 10 days, I think is what it was. And then only 3 months after he was let out of the hotel is when the 2 bodies showed up near Ness's office. Ness was fully 100% convinced that he was the killer. Still, the only evidence that he had on him was purely circumstantial.
Yeah.
So, for years...
So even though they had, like, surveillanced him and had been tailing him, they still had nothing?
Nothing. Yep.
Okay.
For years after this, nobody knew the identity of the man that Ness questioned, and it was completely unofficial and off the books, and probably illegal. So it was kept very hush-hush. Hush-hush. So, yeah. Nobody... It was basically rumored that he had done this, but nobody knew who the guy was. And years later, it came out that was Sweeney. So, going back to August of 1938. The 16th is the date that the last 2 bodies were found in view of Ness's office. Mm-hmm. Only 2 days later, on the 18th, Ness led a raid on the Kingsbury run shantytown. His plan was to go in and arrest literally anyone that they could for any reason that they could find and think of, and maybe they'll get lucky and arrest the killer.
I remember this part of it.
Oh, it gets worse.
Yeah.
They ended up arresting 63 people total. They were all charged with being homeless, which is bullshit. And they all ended up pleading guilty, apparently.
I don't think that's a crime, sir.
Yeah, Well, his plan was by arresting them and charging them with something, he could get their fingerprints for future reference. Either as the killer, or if they end up becoming a victim, because that's where they're thinking all the victims came from, was Kingsbury Run. If they end up becoming a victim, they could be identified that way. So that was his reasoning for arresting all these people.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know what they end up being sentenced with, but they had pled guilty. They were probably charged like 10 cents or something, because it's 1938.
Right.
Once all these people were arrested, this is the really awful part, Ness ordered Kingsbury Run to be burned to the ground, and that's exactly what frickin' happened. To ashes. They burned the entire place. His reasoning was that he was protecting the people there by, quote unquote, depriving the killer of victims to pull from, because he thought that's where the killer was targeting transients from. So he was like, oh, I'm saving all of you from being a victim of this killer. Yeah.
I'm speechless.
Elliot Ness fell hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not for nothing, but they didn't find any more bodies after that were at least linked to this killer. Because there's talks of some killings that happened in like the early 40s and even some in the 20s that I guess were similar enough to these bodies to where they're like, maybe somebody did it longer, blah blah blah. But these are the only 13 that are confirmed for this particular killer.
Okay.
So, needless to say, Cleveland as a whole was very unimpressed with Ness.
Yeah.
And pissed. So all that this did was having the city to have to relocate just a shit ton of people whose shit completely burned.
Yeah.
Houses, So his reputation was very damaged after this. And the entire case is forever known as Ness's biggest failure.
I would say.
That pretty much led to the end of his life. He fell apart after this.
Wow.
But he had the audacity to, a few years later, run for mayor of Cleveland. The audacity of this man. Yeah. Needless to say, it was a humiliating defeat because Cleveland was like, no, sir. We remember what you did.
We remember you.
You burned down part of our city.
My God.
Yeah. So Sweeney was in and out of psych hospitals in his later life. And again, supposedly after he checked himself into a psych hospital, the killings had stopped because obviously the last two killings were it. So there's that.
Yeah.
He did end up dying in one in 1964. Sweeney basically harassed Ness for the rest of Ness's life, into the 50s even. He'd send him letters and shit. Don't know what the letters consisted of. And obviously it was never a confession of any sort, but he was constantly sending Ness shit for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And Elliot Ness ended up dying in 1957 from alcoholism, which is interesting since he was a prohibition officer back in his prime. So there's that little nugget there. So my thought is with this whole case, the reason that Ness wasn't successful in this is because his other big cases that he was known for, he was handed the guilty subject and he just basically had to figure out how to get him.
Basically hey, get the dirt on this person. We
know
it's
this
person.
Guy is doing all of these things.
Yeah.
We just we need you to figure out how to get him for it.
Yeah.
Whereas this case, they knew nothing.
Yeah.
And they just went to Elliot Ness because he's this famous guy who got Al Capone, so he could get anybody.
That's not, it's
that
not
is
the same.
Not the case.
Not the same.
At all. So I that's my personal opinion. I think that's why he was very not successful in this. Even though he feels like he was, because until the day he died, thought that Sweeney was the guy that did all of this.
Okay, but still though.
But I mean,
you have you
justice
never got
wasn't served.
You never got anything on him, and you even held him captive.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah. So Murillo, he never believed that Sweeney was the killer.
Mm-hmm.
He thought, actually, one of the things said he thought he was too overweight to be able, because he's still on the train thing. Like, he's convinced the killer, because he thought maybe some of the later killings in Pennsylvania, actually, was linked to this. And that the killer would take the train back and forth, basically.
Killings in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. I didn't look into them, but there was some apparently that he thought was linked to this killer.
Or it might be like those that are similar enough to where you might consider them.
Right. That's what he was thinking.
Okay.
And he thought that Sweeney was too overweight to do this on the train, and I don't know what that has to do with anything, but like, that's just kind of an aside there.
You have to be a little bit more fit to jump on and off trains.
I guess.
Move bodies around.
I did see, there's one picture of Sweeney, and I don't think he looks like a large guy, so I don't know.
Well, you gotta understand, like, what was considered overweight in, like, 30s is way different.
Yeah, I mean, during the Depression when nobody could eat.
Well, that, and, like, I mean, even in, like, the 50s when Judy Garland was famous, people were like, she's fat. Like, right? Are you kidding me? I think I'm 4 times her size.
So, there was actually a suspect that was arrested.
Okay.
And this was for Florence Polillo's murder. And she was victim number...
She was like right in the middle, wasn't she?
She was towards the beginning-ish.
Yeah, right in the middle.
Yeah, the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, victim number 4 is what she was.
Okay.
The man that was arrested, he was arrested actually July of 1939. So this was even after all of the killings stopped. So his name was Frank Dolezal. He was a bricklayer who actually had lived with Frances. I keep calling her Frances. Florence. There's too many F's because there's Frances Sweeney. I think that's what I'm trying to do. So he lived with Florence for a short time. And they ended up finding out that he knew the other 2 identified victims. Like, he had known them in passing because they were all from the same area. They all frequented Kingsbury Run. So they're like, oh, he must be it. He lived with Florence and knew the other 2. He's our guy. So he confessed to Florence's murder, but then he later recanted because he said that he was beat into confessing. And looking back at that, you could tell that the confession was very coached.
Oh.
So I didn't...
Who was he interviewed by?
I think they said the sheriff. It wasn't Murillo. He wasn't the sheriff.
Because you said this was after all the killings.
Yeah.
So probably like post large investigation.
So I don't actually know if Murillo was the one that arrested him or not.
Okay.
Either way, I think they said it was the sheriff of that county that was doing this and doing this with Frank Dolezal. So this was, I said this was July of 1939. So a month later, in August of 1939, Dolezal committed suicide by hanging in his jail cell before his trial. So his trial he was still in there for Florence's murder, but committed suicide right before that. The crazy thing, though, about this was the hook that he hung from was 5'7" from the floor. Dolezal was 5'8". So while it could still happen, however, his autopsy showed multiple broken ribs from being beat while in custody. And that's where they think that's why he was saying that he confessed, because he was clearly being beat in custody. And forensic science experts looked at his autopsy, and they say that he didn't die the way they said he died, but they don't explicitly say that he was murdered. So they don't actually give any explanation, but they're like, I don't think he didn't die that way.
Like, no,
I don't know that's what that was.
Yikes.
But in 2010, he was cleared of the murder, because up to that point, even though he was never convicted, he died before his trial.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was still looked at as Florence's killer, but in 2010, they cleared him.
Well,
So
yeah.
So that's good.
Because they didn't have, like, hardly anything on him anyway.
Other than
he
knew
lived with
her,
Florence
he
and
lived
knew
with her
a couple.
and knew the other people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, no. So, something that I'll leave you with. James Bedall, he researched this case for 18 years. He's recent-ish. He wrote a book about his findings and everything like that. I didn't read the book. But he, like I said, researched it for 18 years, and he goes further into the Sweeney thing. He fully agrees with Elliot Ness that Francis Sweeney was the killer. Mm-hmm. He found out that a homeless vagrant came forward at one point in time and said that a doctor tried to drug him in his office. He gave him food and shoes, but then the man started to feel weird after he ate some of the food, and he took off because he thought he'd been poisoned. The description of the doctor fit Sweeney. I have a really hard time with names.
Yeah.
His description fit Sweeney and even where the clinic was, because I guess officers had like driven him, taken him around the area, and it was noted that Sweeney's clinic didn't really look like a hospital or type of clinic. It was like a plain regular building, I guess.
Oh.
I don't know. So he kind of had a hard time like, oh, maybe, but no, it's definitely in this area. And that's the area that Sweeney's clinic was in. And not for nothing, but his clinic was next to a funeral home, apparently. He had an agreement, I guess, with the undertaker that if there was any unclaimed bodies that he got, he would give them to Sweeney so he could do like experimental surgeries on, I guess. I don't know, this was something that this James Bedall guy had found out. So this is what he's saying could be how he drained all the bodies of blood and why they didn't have any blood at the scenes, because he thinks that he killed all the people in his clinic, was somehow able to get a hold of the not the autopsy table, but the table that the undertaker used to basically drain them of everything.
Oh.
Used that, drained them, cut them up, and then took them somewhere and dumped them.
Well, then doesn't it make more sense for the funeral director to be the murderer?
There obviously are critics of this.
Cahoots.
Well, there's obviously critics of this saying like, no, the funeral director or the undertaker probably would have figured something was going on, blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah, because, I mean, like, that makes no sense for him to be not only murdering people, but also breaking into someone else's business with the murdered person.
Well, because apparently the back of their buildings,
the
back of their buildings didn't face anything like public, so that they were like, he could have just used the back entrance of the funeral home, blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, he says that he possibly tricked some of the homeless people with food and shelter. Mm-hmm. And taken them to his clinic, drugged them, and killed them. Maybe. So he has a quote. He says, I quote, "I think I put together a pretty good circumstantial case. I realized you couldn't take it to court, and Ness realized back then that he couldn't take it to court." So that's why he thinks. He thinks he put it together. He's got the killer.
Okay.
So my thing is, there's a lot of the cases, even though they are similar, they're so different.
Yeah.
The victim pool is very different. And again, clearly we saw with Charles Cullen, not every serial killer is the same to where they have the same thing all the time. However, I just don't know if this is just one person. I'm not sold on the fact that it's one person.
That all this was done by one person?
Yeah, I am not sold on that fact at all. I don't know that it would have been two people like the entire time. I just think it's different people just because of how different the stuff is. I don't know, but I mean, we're never going to know because it's unsolved.
Yeah, I mean, I think with every year a case gets more and more, I don't want to say impossible to solve, but
I mean, everybody's dead at this point in time for this, you know?
I think at this point, like, the percentage of it being solved every year, I think it gets more and more.
It gets lower and lower.
Yeah, like...
Yeah, no, I get that. But I think Sweeney definitely looked good for it. He had the means, he had the ability, he had the capability.
I mean, it's in the possibility because, I mean, if you think of it in the guy that did the research on it, like, if you think in, like, his perspective of, okay, well, maybe this was, you know, a doctor who was a little off his rocker.
Right.
And doing some weird experiments with people. I mean, maybe that's why the cuts are different. Maybe that's why things are exposed in a different way.
Well, and a couple of victims were burned. Some kind of chemical burn.
The chemical burn. I mean...
Yeah, that is true.
You know?
Yeah, I guess that definitely would be better if it was a doctor doing that. Unlike like a hunt, if they thought maybe it was a hunter or butcher.
Yeah.
They may not think of it as an experimental thing. They're probably stick to their guns in that it'd be more similar, but maybe you're right. Maybe it was the doctor experimenting.
I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head as to if we're still grouping all of these together.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the only thing that would come to my mind. Even though they're kind of similar, they're all very different in the aspect of we have a few things that's like underlying why we think that they're connected.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, nearly everything is different other than it's not a full human body and the body has been dumped somewhere.
Right.
And the cuts are very precise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, other than that.
And you know, the victim that was kind of identified by the dental records, I don't know if that fits because, I mean, literally she was just a bag of bones. Yeah. There was no flesh left. So I don't know if that one fits as much. I think the big reason why is because her skull was not found with the other bones. But I don't know that it was a bag big enough for the entire body to be in, and then over time
it decomposing, in the bag, or if it was just like someone had these for a very, very long time and then disposed of them.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's the only one that doesn't fit for me.
Yeah.
But I mean, either way, it's awful. It's awful. Wild. All of it's pretty gross.
And it's also when you said that you don't think it's all one person, that's also very within the realm of possibility, because not to call Ohio out, but there have been some very fucked up people that come from Ohio.
Seriously.
I swear it's like Florida, Ohio, and like California. I'm not sorry. I've lived there. Yeah. I've seen it.
Right.
Like lot of strange. Yeah, there's a lot of serial killers from Ohio.
Yeah.
It's nuts. So, I mean, that's also very possible as well.
Well, and Cleveland is way up in northern Ohio. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Lake Erie is right there. It's, on the city lines of Cleveland. So it's real close to Michigan, too. And there's a lot of shit from Michigan, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah. That's the Cleveland Orzo murders.
That's craziness.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we covered that. And again, it's another unsolved one where it's like, I feel like I took a giant breath and I can't even exhale. And this isn't even kind of like, I do say Sweeney looks really good for it, but it's like, other than the fact that he was a doctor and did some, weird shit.
Not a good guy. I mean, regardless, he was not a good guy.
No.
He was violent towards his wife, probably his kids, I would imagine. I didn't see that.
And obviously a shitty doctor if he skipped out on working.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
I don't know. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for joining us this week for 2K Away.
In our unsolved case.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is now episode number 30.
Yeah.
I know. We're really getting along.
We hope to have some good things in the works here soonish.
Yeah, there's some stuff going on behind the scene. Maybe some merchandise.
Maybe.
Hopefully.
We'll see.
And we are getting closer to launching our Patreon. So
Yes.
stay tuned for that.
We will let you know.
Exactly. Because once that's launched, I'm going to get us a present and get us some new mics, or at least replace the one that I'm using because I hate it.
Right.
So if you would like to keep in contact with us, you can follow us on Facebook at
2K Away.
And you can follow us on Instagram at
2K Away Podcast.
And we have a YouTube channel.
2K Away Podcast.
And if you'd like to contact us, we have a Gmail account. If you'd like to contact us and suggest something, or if you want to contact us and just say hello. Oh, or what country you're from.
Yeah.
Yes. At
2K Away Podcast at gmail.com.
Yes.
Anytime you type the word 2, it's actually the number 2.
Yes. So 2, 1, 2. I held up 2 fingers.
For anybody that's just listening.
Sorry. It's been a long day, man. So, we love you all, and we hope you keep listening.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining this week of another Unsolved Paige episode.
Yay.
But luckily, this wasn't 3 hours long. So
Correct. I told you it wasn't going to be a 2-parter or a really super long
Yeah, but when
one.
you tell me that, I don't fucking believe you.
Because you don't listen to me.
Oh, no. I do listen. In fact, I listened to you several times while editing, too. Don't come at me. All right, well, we will see everybody in the next one. Or I guess you will see us or hear us. That's more like it. All right. Bye.
Bye.